Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I am Tom Ricks. I am starting a series that I had honestly hoped I would never have to make, called After the Coup. And I want to clarify right away for stupid people that, of course, a coup is not inevitable. However, I do believe after tonight, a coup attempt is inevitable. It may not be this year, but it will happen. And the strongest reason I give as evidence for that is that when a president of the United States, in a presidential debate, when asked to refuse white supremacy on national television, on every channel, tells his paramilitary, and the Proud Boys are paramilitary, to stand back and stand by, he is essentially telling them that they are on notice and that they are going to be called upon to commit violence. Now, gibbering mouthers and people whose opinion we should not care about will say, no, he didn't mean that, blah, 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 blah. We don't care what those people's opinion are, right? We're past that. Arguing with those people is pointless. Listening to those people will literally lower your intelligence. This podcast is not about whether or not Trump is a monster. This podcast is not about reasoning with the unreasonable. This podcast episode and the entire series is about simple nuts and bolts skills that you will need to deal with things that you have probably never had to experience or deal with in your entire life, depending on who you are. If you're a minority in this country, some of them, such as mass oppression by law enforcement, you have experienced. But even in that case, there are still freedoms that you enjoy that you will not enjoy in a dictatorship. So let's talk about things in order of importance so that you, if you need to leave or get bored, I want information I want to convey to you. But before I give you the list of things I think you should know, I'm going to establish my credentials. And the only credential I think that matters to you is that I actually was in a coup when I used to be a Mormon missionary, back when I was a member of the Mormon Church in Venezuela. In 1993, there was a partial coup after the larger coup by Chavez before he was democratically elected that almost for 3 days looked like they were going to take over the country. And they were stopped and it ended. Now, we all know how Venezuela turned out. And I'm, again, not here to talk about Venezuela in so many words. But I am here to explain that I've been in a situation where the army tries to take a democratically elected government and shuts it down. And let me tell you some things that it's like. The first thing is there is no normal, right? We are used to a 100-year abnormality in this country where the disruption to our society and to our daily lives is larger than it was during World War II or the Cuban Missile Crisis or anything else that has occurred since the 1918 swine flu, which killed many, many more people than COVID. But the thing is that even during that crisis 102 years ago, people still went about their daily business. Now, they died in huge numbers because of it, but in terms of just the disruption of our daily lives, COVID has been huge. Everywhere in the entire world, it has disrupted, but especially in the United States. A coup will be more of a disruption. Americans have never known oppression. I'm sure gibbering mouthers would talk about oppression, but again, they do not know or understand real, genuine oppression. I'm going to do 4 episodes in this series. I'm going to do surviving. I'm going to do resisting. I'm going to do organizing. And then I'm going to do the aftermath. And in each of these, I'm going to do a couple of things I recommend that you read first, because you don't have to take my word for it. Look at people who have experienced this. So for surviving, what you should read is, in terms of nonfiction, you should read The Diary of Anne Frank. You should understand from a first-person perspective what it is like to be someone that is the target of and hunted by a fascist regime. The other 2 things that I recommend that you read are any book about a first-hand survivor of one of the following: the Khmer Rouge, the Rwandan genocide, or the Armenian genocide, because genocide is very likely what will happen if there's a military coup in the United States. And I'll get to that in a second. And then the third thing I recommend that you read is A Handmaid's Tale, because A Handmaid's Tale may be fiction, but it is in fact very well researched, and it is in fact a very good example of the mindset that a lot of these people have and will have, and what they will actually try and set up. And even the ones that are not evangelical will get with the program, because the first thing you need to understand about a coup or a revolutionary movement of any kind, no matter what their underlying ideology is, that when you take a bunch of guns and people with guns and disrupt normal routine, it is the loudest voice in the room that gets heard. The Bolsheviks beat the Mensheviks. In the French Revolution, it was the radical faction versus the moderate faction, because people who want to be comfortable and be moderate and use words and use reason do not understand the mentality of people who have emotionally been driven to the point where they are willing to pick up a gun and risk their lives to throw the existing regime out of power at any cost. And once they've done that, it's an adrenaline rush that keeps coming and coming and coming, and they will continue until they feel that their bloodlust is sated. Which means that even though not all Republicans are fascists and all Republicans are not racists, the ones that are going to be running the party, the ones that are going to be setting the agenda and the talking points, are going to be the most radical among them. And everyone will be afraid to not be seen as pure, to not be seen as correct, to not be seen as loyal. So the ones that have the most radical ideas, the ones that are the most passionate, the ones that want to do horrible things to liberals, will be the ones that rise to power. You need to understand this. The next thing you need to understand is that even if there is not a government coup in the 2020 election, and Trump is removed from power, excuse me, and Trump is removed from power, the next thing you need to understand is this is not going away. This is not a Disney movie. This is not a Hollywood comedy. The credits don't roll and you go home and talk about how great the movie was. The Republican Party has been co-opted by the crazy, and it's not going to calm down when Trump is gone. All of the people who have committed to these ideas and are held under his spell have seen that this works. And the only thing the Republican Party has ever cared about, and certainly for the last 50 years, is winning. And since Trump won, even if he's defeated, they're going to keep trying again at least 2 more times, no matter what the Democrats do. And the fact of the matter is that it only takes a few moderate Democrats like Dianne Feinstein or the guy in West Virginia to prevent the courts from being packed, to prevent Puerto Rico or D.C. from being given the statehood. If these kind of reforms are not put in place, then 2022 is very likely going to be a landslide for the Republicans, and 2024 is another even toss. Do you want to put the fate of not just our country, but the entire world on a coin toss? And yet there are people who are more concerned with their semantic victories. So it is a literal, legitimate threat that possibly another Trump, hell, possibly even Trump himself, even if he's in prison. Last I checked, there's nothing that says a felon can't run for president. It's not in the Constitution. So Donald Trump could run again in 2024. And if he runs again, if he runs again and wins, he will take power. So you need to understand, if for no other reason than just to understand the consequences of what you're dealing with, what you need to be able to do to survive a coup. I've given you the three most important tools, which is you need to understand how they think. This is not a game. You need to understand what it's like and read actual accounts so that you understand the way people will behave in that kind of an environment, and understand that the old rules, the rules you take for granted, freedom of speech, freedom of mobility, freedom of economics, these will not apply. Pretty words will be said, but you look at countries like India or Hungary or Turkey or Poland, and those are illiberal democracies where the freedoms that they used to enjoy have been turned back a little. But there is still vast oppression for the political opposition. If you are in the opposition, you do not have freedom of expression. You can be arrested for political reasons. There are political prisoners in these countries, and they are mild examples compared to other countries such as Russia or China, where they literally kill, imprison, and poison the political opposition simply for speaking up against people that they don't like. And yes, they have actually convicted people for things that they said in the past. So if the Republicans have a military coup in this country, it is entirely possible that they can dig up your old Twitter post or your Facebook post and put you up in front of a kangaroo court and say, you are an enemy of the state because are you now or have you ever been a member of the Democratic Party? And if so, they could, at their own discretion, because there is no rule of law, it is rule of force, they can put you in a gulag or a concentration camp or a prison. So, understanding what the stakes are, let's talk a little bit more about things you can actually do to survive. Survival is the first job of a resistor. If you don't understand how to survive and help other people survive, then the people that you care about survive or deal with the things that are happening, you will not be equipped to do anything. If you want to resist, if you want to organize, if you want to help plan for a future, none of this is possible if you do not survive. So let's talk about some very important things in terms of surviving. The first thing you need to recognize is that the coup does not necessarily have to have tanks running in the streets. The slide away from an actual liberal democracy is complex, and it often is a slow, slippery slope. There are some people who say that we left it 20 years ago with Bush versus Gore or Citizens United. Well, technically that's true, but given the fact that I can hold a sign in front of the White House that says Trump is a dick, tells me that we still have at least some freedom in this country, no matter what others might say. I personally draw the line at two media organizations that are not favorable to the party in power being shut down. As I look at the last 20 years, that is the one recurring common pattern that indicates a democracy becoming an illiberal democracy, an illiberal democracy becoming a dictatorship, or an oligarchy/dictatorship becoming a full-on fascist cult of personality like in China. Because even in China, they had some opposition newspapers, and when Xi took power, he basically crushed the media. The media is the first thing that they seek to control. Sometimes it's slow. In the case of Hungary, Sometimes it's fast in the case of a military coup. When a military coup happens, they seize certain key areas. They seize the leaders of the government that they don't like. So if Trump is the president, then they're going to basically round up Democratic governors and Democratic mayors of major cities. They seize methods of mass control, mass communications, which in the old days used to be radio stations and television stations. Now that would also include internet backbone companies and cable companies, so that there are no effective means of, so they would control the cell phones, they would control the internet, they would control the television stations, and they would control the radio stations. And if they control the military, or if they have a large enough paramilitary, all of this is doable. And technically speaking, if they just simply disrupt it long enough, they can prevent mass popular demonstrations, which is the one thing that can often shut this kind of thing down. They will also, of course, seize critical travel junctions, such as airports or ports, mainly because they will each have a list of people that they are to round up, and the people who are on that list need to be caught, and so they want to make sure that those people do not get away. If you wait until the tanks are rolling in the streets, it is too late. How do you know if you should be leaving versus staying? Well, first of all, that's a personal choice. And again, I'm going to get into resisting in the next podcast. Right now, this is about what you need to do to survive or to help your family survive. And frankly, if you make the choice that you're on the short list of people that are going to be in the round 1, 2, or 3 of the people that they round up and put in concentration camps or just flat out kill, then you should probably consider getting you and everyone that could be used as a hostage against you, everyone you actually care about, everyone that if they took them and put them in a room with duct tape and a gun against their head and said, if you don't come back to the country or you don't surrender yourself, we're going to kill this person, then you should consider getting you and everyone else that you possibly can out of the country. And I will flat out say that I have plans to do so. I have made plans for as much of my family as I think is I can potentially get to be willing to leave to get the hell out of Dodge at a certain point. Now, I may stay, I may go, but you should have your passport ready. And frankly, if you can do it, if you can afford it, I would get the customs rapid pass too. Okay, let's talk about list 1, 2, and 3. Who are the first people that they are going to round up and put in concentration camps? The people who most need to leave. Top of the list, as I said, Democratic leaders, governors, party leaders, former presidents, former cabinet members, anybody who has been a prominent critic of Trump at a national level, who has held any kind of a position that was confirmed by the Senate. If you're one of those 500 military generals that signed a letter endorsing Biden and condemning Trump, all of those guys were confirmed by the Senate. All of those guys are at risk in category 1, not 2 or 3, category 1. And if you're family of those guys, if you're somebody that one of those guys cares about so much that you're a brother or a parent or a sibling or a son or daughter of one of those people, then you are also a target, because even though you're not a direct target yourself, even if you're a Republican, you are somebody that can be used as leverage to get those people to denounce the Democratic Party and to confess for crimes and the conspiracies and all of the things that Trump has been saying can be co-opted by a military state to get you to testify. You need to understand that this is a reality. And if a coup happens, you are at the top of the list, and you would do well to get out of Dodge when 2 opposition media organizations fall. List number 2 is going to be anyone that could potentially rally a large number of people. This is mainly, in my opinion, going to consist of celebrities. And there's a number of different kinds of celebrities, but if you're a social media influencer with, say, more than 100,000 followers and you are a prominently known liberal, If you are a community organizer, if you're a protest organizer, if you're the head of a major liberal non-government organization, such as Amnesty International or Greenpeace, you will be on the second list of people that gets rounded up. Or frankly, if you're a family member of any of those people, you also could get rounded up for leverage or suspicion of being a spy against the state. The next big group is a little bit harder for me to justify, but when I put myself in their head, which is a place I don't want to be, but I'm going to help you, listener, I would argue that group number 3 is going to be the third source of power, which is money, the equivalent of a Soros. So we're talking your rich billionaires, such as Bloomberg or Soros or Bezos or any of the tech lords of Silicon Valley, the ones you've heard me ranting about. All of those, except for Mark Zuckerberg, are going to be considered enemies of the state, and if possible, rounded up with bounties put on their heads. And if you've worked for them closely enough that you can be used as leverage against them, you are also a target. Even if you worked for them 10 years ago, if you have a close enough bond that they could put you in a room and convince them to come back in the country where they can take them and co-opt them and take their property and take their money, you're on that list. If you're a high-level critical employee for a tech company such as Google or Twitter, but especially Google or Apple, where if your company has a contingency for something like this and can shift resources overseas, and they want to unlock the Android infrastructure, or they want to unlock the Google search engine, or they want to unlock Apple phones so that the state can start to spy on them again, then you are a target. You are somebody that they're going to want to get. You're somebody that will basically be put to work for the state. That's there, and then arguably the fourth list is going to be basically anybody that is sufficiently denounced by the paramilitaries. Like they're going to have their hands full for, I would argue, 2 to 6 months with groups 1, 2, and 3, and everybody's going to hope that it's not them, and it will eventually come to them, and they'll start going through minorities and LGBT and Democrats. And basically anybody that doesn't suck up to the Proud Boys or the white supremacists or the cops enough, you're a target. You just are. So if you're on that list, you should seriously consider getting out. And if you don't consider getting out, you should consider lying low. Even if you're not on that list and you're not getting out, your next most important survival skill is, in fact, lying low. Even if you resist, being a target is stupid, right? And I'll get to what you need to understand if you're going to be a resistor against a military coup, because it's not the same thing as being a resistor against an illegitimately elected president. It is a whole different ball of wax. So you need to understand that you need to have the ability to, even if you have reason not to, you need to have the ability to and teach others how to lie low. So the first thing you need to understand these days in lying low is some of the stuff is going to be obvious, but I'm going to say the obvious because just because it's obvious doesn't mean you might not think, you might be thinking. Obvious things are missed when you are panicked. And you should have a checklist prepared, not just a COVID go bag or a hurricane go bag, but a coup go bag as of tonight. And at the top of that list is you need a burner cell phone. You need a cell phone that you bought with cash or cryptocurrency that is a means of communication that is not immediately tied to your cell phone. Your cell phone, as soon as you decide that you're going to lie low, should be crushed, shut down, or at minimum put in a bag that is a Faraday cage so that it not just turned off, not just the battery removed, but put in a wireless or in a wire mesh such that the transmissions literally can't get in and out. Understand that everything you buy electronically by your debit card or your credit card is monitored, and these agencies will also be immediately co-opted, controlled, and monitored by the federal government. And frankly, there's almost no actual firewall between the credit card companies and the federal government at all anymore. If they want to know about what you're doing with your credit card for the slightest reason, even without a warrant, they're going to get it. So you need to understand that anything you buy that isn't with cash is going to be known about, right? So if you decide that you're going to lay low because you're on category 3 or 4 and you're going to go up to your parents' cabin in the woods, well, they're going to see the gas that you buy between here and there, and they're going to see that the food you buy at the grocery store with your credit card, right? So either buy gift cards at Target or get cash. And if you can't do that, then get a backpack and we'll live like a homeless person. I don't have answers to everything. What I am telling you is if you are not actually lying low, if you are using a credit card that they can trace in 30 seconds. So that's basic lying low. Let's go to intermediate skill in lying low, right? The next thing you need to understand is even if you have a laptop or a phone that's not immediately traceable to you, there are very advanced machine learning tools that can recognize your face, that can recognize your voice, and your best bet is to encrypt everything. And by everything, I mean everything. Signal is an app that you can download on your phone. It's your friend. Even if they try and co-opt it, it's been deliberately designed so that it will be very difficult for them to get into it. It might shut down. The other apps that you should consider are Telegram, which is used in Iran and in Russia, and those governments have repeatedly tried to shut it down. It's decentralized. It's run by a crazy guy who's a Russian expatriate billionaire, and there may be some issues there, but which is why I don't use it. But here's the thing I do know. It does work, and unlike Signal, it doesn't have a central repository. And you can sideload it onto an Android phone, and more importantly, it's what's used by basically every group that in the world that isn't on Signal that wants to keep a low profile. So if you need to communicate with your friends and family, try it with Signal first. Signal, you can get a good voice level communication and send pictures just like you would with SMS. Do not use regular SMS. It's ridiculously easy to track. Snail mail is fine as long as you wear plastic gloves, because understand that fingerprints are also very easy to track. At this point, between school programs for missing kids, your DNA and your fingerprints are also probably held by the FBI and in some database somewhere. And if they're not actually in a federal database, they will be within about 6 months, because every local fingerprint and DNA database will be centralized by the Department of Homeland Security to track people that they don't want moving around. The other thing you need to understand is if you don't leave the country in a regime that is not controlled by its citizens, travel is also restricted, which means if you know somebody that's really good at forging documents, you might want to get to know them. And that's not even resistance level stuff, that's survival. Because having the ability to get in and out of a place is incredibly useful. And am I encouraging you to break the law? Well, no, but the government we're talking about doesn't exist yet. And I would encourage you to break the law if it's to survive a military coup. So the other thing you need to understand is you should avoid cameras. Now, that's very difficult to do these days, but if you can't, then you need to act as natural and normal as possible when you are around cameras, so that you don't draw attention to yourself. And that means don't act nervous, don't act suspicious, don't wear a really stupid disguise. You know, a baseball cap and some sunglasses is a better disguise than, you know, something you might buy at a costume shop, right? Except for maybe a wig. The key thing is do the best you can. as a group, if you have a large family, you're really not going to be able to do much better than the intermediate, because the stuff you have to do at the advanced level it's just too hard, especially have kids. Kids are going to want to talk to people. Kids are going to want to do things. Keep it simple. Find a place, if you need to lie low, find a place that's relatively isolated that you can get as much time as possible. Because if you're surviving, if you're laying low, what you really want to do is buy yourself time, right? Avoid the police. Avoid the Department of Homeland Security, avoid the paramilitaries, avoid the Republican Party. Just don't interact with them. Every time you interact with them, it is a chance of something going bad, of something going wrong, of you saying the wrong thing and being called in for questioning. And it's just not good. Ask somebody from Hong Kong what it's like there right now. It's easy to do on Twitter. I'm not going to get too far into the advanced version of this, but what I will say is that for those of you that want to take it to the next level, you've heard of the dark net. It's not as hard as you think to get onto it. Learn about Tor, learn about the dark net, learn about cryptocurrency, understand the differences between cryptocurrency and how they are tracked and which ones are anonymous and which ones are not. Bitcoin is the most widely accepted, but it's also a fishbowl, and it's really easy to track, but it's also the easiest to get. There are legitimately anonymous cryptocurrencies, but they're not as widely accepted. And frankly, if you have time and intelligence and resources, you can get almost anything with cryptocurrency. And understand that if you're defying the government, whether that is our existing democratically elected government or an illegitimate coup, you're breaking the law by not paying taxes or by bypassing their traditional channels. And so you need to understand that even if you're simply lying low and buying medication that might be used to track you with cryptocurrency, that you need to think like a criminal when you do it. And if you need to think like a criminal, there's a lot of TV shows that have very smart criminals on them. I don't even need you need to know the difference between a dumb criminal and a smart criminal, right? A dumb criminal are the ones you see on Cops or Police Live or whatever the hell it is these days. A smart criminal is Breaking Bad or I can't even remember the name of that show on Netflix with the Ozarks. Yeah, both of which are very smart criminals. All right, so we got into laying low. But we need to get a little bit more into it, right? Because as an American, your birthright is your free speech. Your birthright is to stick it to the man. And if you're a resistor or an organizer, there is a time and place to do that. But you need to understand that there are times and places not to do that in a military occupation, right? You do that when you've got the numbers, right? When there is a crowd of people and you are masked and they are masked and you are protected. You don't do that as an individual idiot on a street corner to a cop or a paramilitary thug or a Department of Homeland Security thug and get yourself locked up in an unmarked van. Strength in numbers is the rule for freedom of speech in a military coup, because there is no freedom of speech. You need to understand what many of you have taken for granted from the day you were born, that you have had rights that were protected by blood and sweat and tears of the veterans. That the real reason we honor our veterans is not because of the shiny tanks and the shiny planes. It's because they have suffered unimaginable things, especially in the Revolutionary War, especially in Valley Forge. Unimaginable pain and suffering and loss to preserve your right to go on Twitter and call Trump a jerk. Because if it hadn't been for the early sacrifices of the American soldier, democracy would not likely have formed as strongly as it did, and it certainly wouldn't have spread, right? America is not the first democracy. It's not even the first constitutional democracy. It is the first one that's lasted a long time. There were republics well before this and democracies well before this, but they very rarely survived very long, because as soon as the first crisis comes along, without a constitution, without the separation of powers, and as much as you've heard me rant about the Constitution, at the time it was brilliant because it created a safe, stable environment for people to grow up and take their freedom for granted. And that's actually important, because the norm, the belief, the inherent belief that you are worth something and that your king is not better than you, or better yet, your president, is something that we had to earn. We had to take it by force of arms. Organized, lawful, moderated, intelligent force of arms, which is why the revolution didn't become a disaster after we won, which I'll get to in the fourth podcast, because simply winning the war isn't enough. If you don't have a strategy for after, you're toast. Toast. But before you can fight, and before you can organize, and before you can rebuild after the bastards knock it down, you need to be able to survive. You need to make sure that you have a way of earning money, a skill that you can ideally do anywhere that earns only cash or cryptocurrency. You need to make sure that you have money. You need to make sure that you have food. You need to make sure that you have clothing and shelter and transportation and documents. Unlike other countries, you in the occupied United States of America will now be required to have your papers and your identification at all times. Not just like you have to have your license when you're in your car. I mean, on you. You're walking down the street, a cop stops you. Minorities are used to this, right? They are oppressed people within a supposedly free society. They have to have their papers on them. If you are Latino or Hispanic, you better damn well have your citizenship papers on you, or ICE might round you up. Hell, they might round you up anyway. But at least if you got your passport on you, or you've got your driver's license, you've got a chance that they'll move on to somebody else. Well, after the coup, that's everybody. They think you look too gay. They think you look like a lesbian. They think that you look like a liberal. You're wearing a t-shirt that's snarky and politically clever, or a book or a movie or a play that they don't like on a list that changes literally every week that you might not even be aware of things that are forbidden. They might just come up to you and ask for your papers, and God help you if you don't have them. You might still be toast even if you have them. But if you don't have your papers on you, say hello to a cell. And if you do have your papers on you, they still might. But the thing is that you need to understand that in a coup, in this society, you are not free. Your choices are lay low, fight intelligently, leave, get killed, or get arrested. What you don't have as a choice, the instant they take over, is the ability to vote, or to worship how you want, or worship where you want, or to talk to who you want, or to say what you want on the internet. All of those things are gone. And you need to understand that. You need to understand that the world is different. And what you've grown up with your whole life is now gone. And you're going to have to rebuild it from scratch. And there's nobody that can help you do that. But I do want to reiterate that this is not all doom and gloom, right? It certainly sounds like it, and the very topic that I'm discussing requires hard truths if we get to that. Among the which is, if you can do some basic preparation in terms of a go bag, in terms of your passport, in terms of cash, if you can do it, or cryptocurrency if you can't, gift cards, burner phones, places to hide or lay low, getting your head in the right space so you don't get shot by people who are willing to do so if you're the wrong political persuasion, are all things that you can do now, and that, at least for me, make me feel more empowered in the face of a danger that we never expected to face in our lifetimes in our own nation. So the whole point of this podcast is not to depress you, it is to empower you with knowledge. And I want to reiterate that in the next sessions, I'm going to be equipping you with an understanding of what you need to understand to resist, to organize, and to rebuild. But you can't do any of those if you don't survive, which is why I started with this one. Good luck. This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright 2020.
To fight the forces of evil!